What happens when one of the greatest actors of our generation walks onto a daytime talk show expecting a respectful conversation about his legendary career, only to be blindsided by a host who thinks she can tear him down on live television? It only took 34 seconds of Denise Welch's disrespectful questioning for Anthony Hopkins to do something nobody saw coming. This is the story of the most explosive walkout in British daytime TV history. Anthony Hopkins sat in the guest chair on the Loose Women set, his posture calm and dignified. The studio lights beamed down on the panel. Denise Welch sat at the center, flanked by Nadia Sawalha, Kay Adams, and Jane Moore. The audience applauded as the show returned from commercial break. Denise leaned forward with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. So Anthony, let's talk about your career. You've been acting for what, about 100 years now? The audience laughed nervously. Anthony's expression remained neutral. Well, I've been fortunate to work in this industry for many decades, yes. Many decades, Denise repeated, her tone dripping with something that felt off. And in all those decades, tell me, do you think you've ever given a performance that wasn't just you playing yourself? The other panelists shifted in their seats. Nadia's eyes widened slightly. Kay looked down at her notes. Anthony paused, clearly taken aback. I'm sorry, could you clarify what you mean by that? Well, Denise continued, her voice growing louder, some critics have said that every role you take, whether it's Hannibal Lecter or a butler or whoever, it's just Anthony Hopkins being Anthony Hopkins. You're not really acting, are you? You're just showing up and collecting a paycheck. Jane Moore jumped in quickly. I don't think that's quite fair, Denise. Anthony has won multiple Academy Awards. Oh, I know he's won awards, Denise shot back. But winning awards doesn't mean you're actually transforming into different characters. It just means you're good at playing the same character over and over again. Anthony sat up straighter. His voice remained calm, but firm. I take great care with every role I accept. Each character requires extensive preparation, research, and emotional commitment. Emotional commitment? Denise scoffed. Is that what you call it when you show up on set and do the exact same brooding, intense stare in every single film? Nadia tried to intervene. Anthony, I personally loved your work in The Father. That performance was incredibly moving and completely different from anything you'd done before. Thank you, Anthony said, nodding toward Nadia with genuine appreciation. But Denise wasn't finished. The Father, yes. Let's talk about that. You played an elderly man losing his memory. Wasn't exactly a stretch for someone your age, was it? Method acting at its finest. Just be yourself and pretend to forget your lines. The audience gasped. Kay Adams put her hand on Denise's arm. Denise, come on. What? Denise pulled her arm away. I'm just asking the questions everyone's thinking. We're supposed to be honest on this show, aren't we? Anthony's jaw tightened. I'm not sure what I've done to deserve this level of disrespect, but I came here today to have a conversation about my work, not to be insulted. Insulted? Denise laughed. Oh, please. If you can't handle a little criticism after all these years in the business, maybe you're not as tough as everyone thinks you are. Jane Moore shook her head. This isn't criticism, Denise. This is just rude. I'm being real, Denise insisted. Unlike some people who just coast on their reputation and expect everyone to bow down to them. You know what I think? I think Anthony Hopkins hasn't challenged himself in 20 years. He found a formula that works, and he's been milking it ever since. Anthony took a slow breath. I've worked with some of the finest directors in cinema. Steven Spielberg, Oliver Stone, Ridley Scott. I don't believe any of them would have continued to work with me if they felt I wasn't bringing something unique to each project. Oh, dropping names now, are we? Denise leaned back in her chair with a smirk. Yes, you've worked with famous directors. Congratulations. But that doesn't answer my question. When was the last time you actually disappeared into a role instead of just being Anthony Hopkins with a different costume? Nadia looked directly at Denise. I really think you're being unfair here. Anthony is a guest on our show. And as a guest, he should be able to handle some tough questions, Denise snapped back. Or is he too fragile for that? Fragile? Anthony's voice rose slightly for the first time. I'm not fragile, but I do expect basic courtesy, especially from someone who's supposed to be a professional broadcaster. Professional broadcaster, Denise repeated mockingly. That's funny coming from someone who mumbles his way through half his scenes. Do you know how many people have told me they can't understand a word you're saying in your films? Kay Adams jumped in. Denise, that's enough. Anthony has one of the most distinctive and clear-speaking voices in cinema. To you, maybe, Denise said dismissively, but I've heard differently. I've heard that directors have to do take after take because you can't be bothered to enunciate properly. Anthony stared at her in disbelief. That's simply not true. I take great pride in my diction and voice work. Well, your pride might be misplaced, Denise said with a shrug. Just saying what I've heard. Jane Moore's face flushed with anger. You can't just make up rumors and present them as fact on live television, Denise. I'm not making anything up, Denise protested. I'm sharing what people in the industry have told me. What people? Anthony asked, his voice steady but cold. Can you name one person who said this? Denise waved her hand. Dismissively. I'm not going to reveal my sources. Because there are no sources, Jane said. You're just trying to provoke him. I'm trying to have an honest conversation, Denise insisted. Something this show is supposed to be about. Or are we only honest when it's convenient? Anthony looked at each of the panelists. Nadia gave him an apologetic look. Kay shook her head in frustration. Jane looked genuinely angry on his behalf. You know what I find interesting? Denise continued. You came on this show expecting us to fawn all over you, to tell you how brilliant you are, to stroke your ego like everyone else does. But the moment someone asks you a real question, you can't handle it. A real question? Anthony's voice was sharp now. You haven't asked me a real question. You've made accusations, insulted my work, and spread false rumors. That's not journalism. That's not even good conversation. It's just cruel. Cruel? Denise laughed again. Oh, come on. You're a big, tough actor who's played serial killers and monsters. Surely you can handle a little heat from a talk show host. Nadia leaned forward. Anthony, please ignore her. The rest of us are genuinely interested in hearing about your career and your experiences. Thank you, Nadia, Anthony said quietly. I appreciate that. But Denise wasn't done. Tell me something, Anthony. Do you ever watch your old films and cringe? Do you ever think, wow, I really phoned that one in? Because I've got to tell you, there are quite a few performances in your filmography that feel pretty phoned in to me. Kay Adams stood up slightly in her seat. Denise, stop it. This is beyond unprofessional. Unprofessional? Denise's voice rose. I'm doing my job. I'm pushing back against the narrative that everything this man touches turns to gold. Someone needs to be honest about the fact that he's been coasting for years. Anthony stood up slowly. The studio went silent. Even the audience held their breath. Which films? Anthony asked quietly. Which performances do you think I phoned in? Denise seemed surprised by the question. Well, I mean, there are several. Name one, Anthony said. Just one. Denise hesitated. I don't have the list in front of me right now. Because there is no list, Anthony said. You haven't actually watched my work, have you? You've just decided to come after me today for reasons I can't begin to understand. I've seen plenty of your films, Denise protested weakly. Then name one, Anthony repeated. Name one specific performance and tell me exactly what was wrong with it. The silence stretched out. Denise opened her mouth, then closed it again. Jane Moore smiled slightly. That's what I thought. Denise's face reddened. Just because I can't recall a specific title right this second doesn't mean I'm wrong. It means you're talking without any foundation, Anthony said. You're making claims you can't back up. You're attacking me personally, for no reason other than to create drama for your show." "That's not true," Denise said, but her voice lacked conviction. "It is true," Anthony continued. "And I've had enough of it. I came here today in good faith. I cleared my schedule. I prepared thoughtful answers to questions I assumed would be respectful and substantive. Instead, I've been subjected to baseless attacks and mockery." Nadia reached out as if to touch his arm. "Anthony, please. Not all of us feel this way." "I know you don't," Anthony said gently. "And I appreciate you trying to steer this conversation in a more positive direction. But I can't sit here and allow myself to be disrespected like this." Denise's face grew even redder. "Oh, so now you're going to storm off? Very mature. Very professional. More professional than anything you've displayed today," Anthony said calmly. "I've been in this industry for longer than you've been alive. I've been interviewed thousands of times. I've faced tough questions, challenging questions, even hostile questions. But I've never been treated with such outright contempt by someone who clearly knows nothing about my body of work." "I know plenty," Denise snapped. "Then prove it," Anthony challenged. "Tell me one thing, one specific thing about any of my performances that demonstrates actual knowledge and insight. Not vague criticisms, not rumors you claim to have heard. Something real." Denise looked at her fellow panelists as if hoping for backup, but none came. Kay looked away. Jane raised her eyebrows expectantly. Nadia just shook her head sadly. "I don't have to prove anything to you," Denise finally said. "No, you don't," Anthony agreed. "But you've proven plenty to me. You've proven that you're more interested in creating conflict than having genuine conversations. You've proven that you don't respect your guests or your audience enough to prepare properly. And you've proven that you're willing to say anything, true or not, to get attention." "How dare you?" Denise started to stand. "How dare I?" Anthony's voice cut through the studio. "How dare you? You invited me here. You asked me to give my time to your show, and then you ambushed me with unfounded accusations and personal attacks. You should be ashamed of yourself." The audience began to murmur. Some people nodded in agreement with Anthony. Others looked shocked at the confrontation. Kay Adams spoke up. "Anthony, on behalf of the show, I want to apologize. This should never have happened." "I appreciate that," Anthony said, "but an apology doesn't change what's happened here today." Jane Moore nodded. "You're absolutely right. You deserved better than this." Denise stood up fully now. "Oh, so now you're all turning on me? I was just trying to ask difficult questions." "There's a difference between difficult questions and disrespectful attacks," Jane said firmly. "And you crossed that line about 5 minutes into this interview. I'm the host of this show," Denise said angrily. "I decide what questions to ask. And I decide whether to stay and answer them," Anthony said. "And I've decided I won't." He began to remove his microphone. His hands moved deliberately, carefully. The studio crew looked uncertain about what to do. "You're really going to walk off?" Denise asked. "In the middle of a live broadcast?" "I am," Anthony confirmed, "because staying would suggest that I accept this behavior as normal or acceptable. And I don't." Nadia stood up. "Anthony, I completely understand. I'm so sorry this happened." "Thank you, Nadia," Anthony said. "You've been nothing but kind." He handed his microphone to a crew member who had approached hesitantly. The audience sat frozen, unsure whether to react. Denise pointed at him. "This is incredibly unprofessional. You're making a huge scene." Anthony turned to face her one last time. "I'm not the one who made a scene. You did that the moment you decided to attack, rather than interview. I'm simply refusing to participate in it any further." "We had an agreement," Denise said desperately. "You were supposed to be here for the full segment." "And you were supposed to conduct yourself as a professional host," Anthony replied. "I guess we're both disappointed today." Jane Moore stood and walked toward Anthony. "Let me walk you out." That won't be necessary, Anthony said. But thank you for your support during this. Kay Adams also stood. Anthony, please know that not everyone on this panel agrees with how you were treated. I know that, Anthony said. It was quite obvious who was being respectful and who wasn't. Denise's voice rose to almost a shout. So that's it? You're just going to leave? What am I supposed to do with the rest of this segment? Anthony paused at the edge of the set and looked back at her. I suggest you use it to reflect on how you treat your guests. Or perhaps you could spend the time actually watching some of my films, so you'd have something substantive to say about them next time. The audience gasped at the sharpness of his words. I've seen your films, Denise protested weakly. Have you? Anthony asked. Because everything you've said today suggests otherwise. You've relied on vague generalizations and made-up criticisms. That's not the behavior of someone who's familiar with someone's work. That's the behavior of someone who's winging it and hoping nobody notices. Nadia covered her mouth with her hand. Kay looked down at the desk. Jane smiled despite the tension. I am familiar with your work, Denise insisted. Then why couldn't you name a single specific example when I asked you to? Anthony's voice was calm but devastating. Why couldn't you provide any concrete criticism? Why did everything you say sound like it came from someone who'd maybe seen a trailer or two, but never sat through an actual film? Denise's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. That's what I thought, Anthony said quietly. You know, the sad thing is, if you'd actually done your homework, if you'd come prepared with real questions based on genuine knowledge of my work, we could have had a fascinating conversation. I love talking about acting. I love discussing the craft, the challenges, the creative process. But you weren't interested in any of that. You just wanted to tear someone down. That's not fair, Denise said, but her voice wavered. Fair? Anthony repeated. You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you suggested I was too old to act? Was it fair when you implied I can't speak clearly? Was it fair when you accused me of not preparing for roles? None of that was fair. None of it was true, and none of it was based on anything other than your desire to create controversy. The other panelists sat in stunned silence. The audience was completely quiet now, hanging on every word. I think we should go to commercial, Kay said quietly. No, Anthony said. Don't go to commercial on my account. I'm leaving. You can continue with your show however you see fit. But I won't be a part of it. He turned and began walking toward the exit. The cameras followed him. His stride was measured, dignified. There was no storming off, no dramatic flourish. Just a man with self-respect removing himself from a disrespectful situation. Anthony, wait, Denise called out. Can we just start over? He stopped, but didn't turn around. No, we can't. You can't unsay the things you've said. You can't undo the disrespect you've shown. And I can't pretend this conversation went any differently than it did. I'm sorry, Denise said, and for the first time, she actually sounded sincere. I'm sorry if I offended you. Anthony finally turned back. If I offended you. That's not an apology. An apology acknowledges what was done wrong. An apology takes responsibility. What you just offered was a deflection. Denise looked genuinely lost. I don't know what you want me to say. I don't want you to say anything, Anthony replied. Not to me, but perhaps you should think about what you want to say to your audience. They tuned in expecting a conversation with a guest. Instead, they witnessed you attack that guest for no apparent reason. They deserve an explanation more than I do. He walked off the set. The cameras stayed on the panel. Denise sat back down slowly, her face pale. Nadia, Kay, and Jane exchanged glances. Well, Jane finally said, I think we all know who was in the wrong there. Denise looked at her sharply. Are you saying I was wrong? Yes, Jane said simply. You were completely out of line. Kay nodded. I have to agree. That was painful to watch. "Oh, come on," Denise said, but there was no energy behind it. "I was just trying to push him a little." "You pushed him right out the door," Nadia said softly. "And honestly, I don't blame him." Denise looked at the camera, then away. "We should go to commercial." "Yes," Kay agreed. "We should." As the show cut to commercial, the studio remained in shock. The audience sat quietly, processing what they'd witnessed. The crew members looked at each other uncertainly. And somewhere offset, Anthony Hopkins walked out of the building with his dignity intact, having refused to accept treatment that would have diminished him. What makes this moment so powerful isn't just that a legendary actor walked off a talk show. It's how he did it. There was no yelling, no tantrum, no loss of control. Anthony Hopkins simply refused to participate in his own disrespect. He asked direct questions that exposed the hollowness of the attacks against him. He gave Denise Welch every opportunity to back up her claims or change course, and when she couldn't or wouldn't, he made the only choice that preserved his self-respect. The contrast between the two couldn't have been starker. On one side, a host who came unprepared, made baseless accusations, and relied on mockery instead, of substance. On the other side, a guest who remained calm, asked for specifics, and ultimately walked away rather than accept unacceptable treatment. The other panelists' reactions told their own story. Nadia, Kay, and Jane all tried to redirect the conversation. They defended Anthony when Denise attacked him. They apologized for behavior that wasn't theirs to apologize for. They made it clear through their words and body language that they didn't support what was happening. Their professionalism highlighted Denise's lack of it. The audience's silence was perhaps the most damning response of all. In a typical talk show environment, audiences laugh at jokes, applaud good points, and react vocally to dramatic moments. But as this interview deteriorated, the audience grew quieter and quieter. They weren't entertained. They were uncomfortable. They were watching someone be mistreated, and they knew it. When Anthony finally removed his microphone and prepared to leave, he did something crucial. He explained exactly why he was leaving. He didn't just storm off in anger. He articulated clearly what had gone wrong, what lines had been crossed, and why he wouldn't accept it. This turned his exit from a potentially petulant gesture into a principled stand. His final words to Denise were devastating, precisely because they were measured. He didn't attack her personally. He didn't insult her appearance or her intelligence or anything else that would have lowered him to her level. Instead, he simply pointed out the objective facts. She had made claims she couldn't support. She had asked him to name specifics when challenged. She had apologized with an if instead of taking responsibility. Each observation was accurate and impossible to refute. The moment when Denise tried to get him to stay and start over revealed the fundamental disconnect. She seemed to think that what had happened was a minor misunderstanding that could be smoothed over. But Anthony understood that some things can't be taken back. Words have consequences. Disrespect, once shown, can't be hidden. She had revealed how little she valued him as a guest and as a person, and no amount of backtracking could change that. His suggestion that she use the remaining segment time to reflect on how she treats guests was a masterclass in dignified criticism. It wasn't mean. It wasn't petty. It was simply an observation that she might benefit from self-examination. The fact that she had no response to this spoke volumes. Walking off a live television show is always a risk. It can make the person who leaves look difficult or unprofessional. But in this case, staying would have been worse. Staying would have suggested that the treatment he received was acceptable. It would have told future guests that they should tolerate similar behavior. It would have told audiences that disrespect is just part of the entertainment. By leaving, Anthony Hopkins sent a different message. He said that guests deserve respect. He said that professional behavior matters. He said that being famous doesn't mean you have to accept poor treatment. He said that self-respect is more important than completing a television segment. The way he walked out was as important as the decision to walk out. There was no door slamming, no shouting, no dramatic gestures, just a calm, steady exit. The cameras followed him, and what they captured was dignity in motion. A man who knew his worth and refused to compromise it. Think about what this moment means for everyone involved. For Anthony Hopkins, it was a line in the sand, a statement that his legacy and reputation matter enough to defend. For the other panelists, it was a reminder that sometimes you have to speak up when you witness mistreatment, even if it means going against a colleague. For the audience, it was a lesson in self-respect and knowing when to walk away. And for Denise Welch, it was a public demonstration of what happens when you mistake provocation for journalism, when you confuse attacks for questions, when you prioritize drama over substance. She started the interview thinking she could take down a legend. She ended it sitting at a desk with co-hosts who openly disagreed with her and an audience that had watched her fail spectacularly. The questions she asked revealed more about her than about her guest. Asking if someone's been acting for 100 years isn't witty banter when said with contempt. Suggesting that an Academy Award winner doesn't actually act isn't bold journalism when you can't back it up with specifics. Claiming you've heard rumors about someone's professionalism isn't brave truth-telling when you refuse to name sources. Every attack she launched bounced off because there was no substance behind it. When pressed for details, she had none. When asked for examples, she couldn't provide them. When challenged to demonstrate actual knowledge of his work, she came up empty. This wasn't an interviewer holding a powerful person accountable. This was someone throwing mud and hoping something would stick. The fact that her fellow panelists sided with the guest over their colleague is extraordinary. Television hosts typically support each other, at least publicly, but Jane, Kay, and Nadia couldn't in good conscience back Denise's behavior. They saw what the audience saw. They heard what everyone heard, and they knew it was wrong. Their interventions throughout the interview were attempts to save it. When Denise would make a particularly harsh comment, one of them would jump in with something positive. When she'd make an accusation, they'd counter with facts. They tried to balance her negativity with respect for their guest, but eventually they couldn't offset the damage she was doing. Anthony's calm demeanor throughout made the contrast even more striking. As Denise grew more aggressive, he remained composed. As she raised her voice, he lowered his. As she made wild claims, he asked simple questions. The more she spiraled, the more centered he became. This wasn't strategy or calculation. It was simply who he is. A professional who's been in the business long enough to know that meeting aggression with aggression never works. His questions to her were brilliant in their simplicity. Name one film. Name one performance. Give one example. These weren't trick questions. They were basic requests that any interviewer should be able to answer about a guest they've invited on their show. The fact that she couldn't answer them exposed the emptiness of her entire approach. When she claimed she had sources for her rumors, his request to name them was perfectly reasonable. When she refused, citing journalistic protection of sources, the absurdity was obvious. This wasn't an investigation into corruption. This wasn't a whistleblower situation. This was gossip dressed up as insight, and everyone knew it. The moment he stood up, the power dynamic shifted completely. Until then, Denise had the advantage of being on her home turf, in her show, with her panelists. But the moment he stood, he took back his power. He was no longer a guest subjected to hostile questioning. He was a person choosing how to be treated. His statement that he'd cleared his schedule and prepared thoughtful answers was particularly pointed. It highlighted how much respect he'd shown the opportunity, which made her disrespect even more glaring. He'd done his part. He'd shown up, ready to engage. She's the one who'd failed to meet basic standards of professionalism. The line about being interviewed thousands of times and never being treated with such contempt carried weight, because it's true. Anthony Hopkins has sat across from the best interviewers in the world. He's faced challenging questions from serious journalists. He's handled difficult topics with grace and honesty. The implication was clear. He knows what a good interview looks like. And this wasn't it. When Denise accused him of storming off, his correction was perfect. He wasn't storming. He was leaving. There's a difference. Storming implies loss of control, emotional reaction, defeat. Leaving is a choice made consciously. It's taking control rather than losing it. His offer to let Jane walk him out, and his polite decline showed his character even in the midst of conflict. He didn't need backup or support. He was perfectly capable of walking out on his own, but he appreciated the gesture and acknowledged it gracefully. The suggestion that Denise use the remaining segment time to reflect was devastating because it was helpful. Even in the midst of this conflict, even after being disrespected and attacked, he was offering advice on how she could improve. That takes a level of maturity and grace that few people possess. His final observation, that she likely hadn't actually watched his films, cut to the heart of the matter. All of her criticisms, all of her accusations, all of her provocations came from ignorance, not knowledge. She was winging it based on assumptions and stereotypes, not actual familiarity with his body of work. And when someone with decades of acclaimed performances is attacked by someone who hasn't bothered to watch those performances, the attack has no credibility. The way the other panelists responded after he left was telling. They didn't defend Denise. They didn't try to spin what had happened. They simply acknowledged that she'd been wrong. That kind of honesty from colleagues is rare and significant. It showed that what had happened was so clearly out of bounds that they couldn't pretend otherwise.